second part of this video, if you're still listening. So this is point 4 that Obama addressed in his speech. His point 4, not mine. So this was essentially entitled "Reducing Spending in the Tax Code." So what he said in the speech was basically he agreed to the tax cuts, the previous tax cuts, which are already on the books for the wealthy and the corporations, because there was no way that he could get the tax cuts for the middle class to continue if he didn't do that. You know, this point is actually another conciliatory point on his part, because he could very well have stopped that the last time. And so he says he will not renew, this is what he's saying now, he will not renew these tax cuts for the wealthy again. So what does he actually mean? Does he mean the previous tax cuts, which are already on the books and have been extended? Or does he mean the newest Ryan proposal, which proposes another 10% of tax cuts for the wealthy? What is he actually talking about? That's what I would like to know. And so in a way, he sort of upped the ante by saying this, but notice he never said anything like, this is where I will draw the line. I'm not gonna sign any legislation whatsoever coming from Congress which extends these previous tax cuts. That was never mentioned in that speech. Then he goes on to talk about itemized taxes and tax credits for corporations, for individuals, and so on. And he mentions itemized tax deductions, and he also says at the same time that, you know, for instance, the deductions for your mortgage interest, you know, this would, you know, presumably be of concern to you as an average American. He actually says in the speech that this is not really benefiting anyone. And in a few sentences later, he then goes on to say, well, you know, basically, we want these deductions, all these itemized deductions, to be made much more simpler. So what I'm proposing is basically the elimination of certain deductions for the upper 2 percentile, the wealthy people, you know, of these itemized deductions. And yeah, great, that's a great proposal. How is he going to do it? How is he going to do this precisely? So is he going to tell average Americans, no, you know what, we're going to eliminate certain itemized deductions for the wealthy and the corporations, but then we're also going to, you know, scale back the itemized deductions for the average homeowner? Nope. That was all completely vague. Then he starts talking about individual taxes, which then it gets even more vague. I mean, I can't even, I have a copy of the speech here, but I didn't really understand what the hell he was even talking about. And then he launches into corporate tax reform, and once again he says we need to make it competitive corporate tax reform. Well, what the hell does that actually mean? Don't the corporations, the big conglomerates, constantly say we need to be competitive, we need to have our taxes lowered, we want a lower tax rates, and yeah, please, you know, let us keep our little offshore havens? Well, they don't say that. But what does that actually mean when somebody like Obama uses that word? Competitive. Competitive with what? With slave labor overseas, with competitive with Chinese wages, with wages in India? What the hell does that mean? Once again, vague. Then, to top it all off, his fifth point was that he has a fail-safe provision here. In other words, if what he is proposing, the budget that he's proposing, and if it's not implemented by Congress, since he never mentioned a veto to start with, since it's not implemented by Congress by 2014, which of course, presumably he thinks he's going to get reelected, and if that doesn't work out, then there's some sort of a fail-safe provision for everyone. And this is another appointed commission, by the way, that then has the authority to make certain cuts across the board. So, and he actually mentioned the words, act boldly now, instead of kicking our problem down the line. I mean, this is just another one of these phrases which means nothing. It actually sounds like a campaign speech to me. And as I said, he never actually mentioned the words privatization of Social Security, privatization of Medicare. He steers completely away from that word, which is precisely what the Republicans are suggesting. So he's still playing these, these little games, you might say. And and he refuses to draw any kind of political line. So, yeah, what I have to say is this. It was another brilliant oratory from Obama, another brilliant speech. And I could almost predict, without hearing anybody, anything, any website tonight, that most Democrats will probably just cheer and say, look, he was being conciliatory. He's moving. He doesn't want to make enemies, and he says Medicare, it's a big problem. All of it needs reform, and he's basically not ignoring that there is a budget deficit. Well, that's all nice and fine, but he's not countering, really, in any strong way, the most extreme proposals in Congress, which came out by Representative Ryan. He's not doing that. He said at the beginning of his speech that every point of view is to be considered. And so, then, in closing, I suppose every president does that, so I can't really blame him personally for that. But then in closing, he says during his speech that he brings up the subject of patriotism. We're such a great country. We're so exceptional. This is such a great nation. All these talking points over and over and over again. And I suppose, most people will fall for that shit. But I'm going to make one closing sentence here, and somebody long before me, had this to say. The call for patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. So, as I said before in my prior videos, it's not going to change my mind. I'm not going to vote for Obama again because, once again, I believe it is another cave-in couched in very nice wording and so on. And I'm just not going to support the guy anymore. I will support challengers from the left. And if you believe that Obama is moving to the center, you're mistaken. He's not. He's actually moving further and further to the right the longer this entire debate goes on. And if America wants to move back to the center, they should completely condemn anything that Paul Ryan and his budget has to say. But I suppose, Obama can't bring himself to say that. Not in public. And definitely not in private. So, another night of complaining. Good night.